On today's show, we're going to have some fun. It's your way too early trade deadline preview for the New York Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. And the Mets lost their final game of their series against the Chicago White Sox. I did a live stream right after that game. So if you came to this episode today looking for your game recap, your takeaways for what went right and what went wrong as the Mets lost that game but did win the series, you can go back and watch that live stream on YouTube, or it is in your podcast feeds. Since the Mets have an off day and since I already covered that game, I thought we'd have a little bit of fun on today's show and look ahead to the trade deadline for the first time this season. Now, this is not typically a good time to be looking at who's going to be on the move at the deadline because so much can happen over the next 2 months. Remember last year, the Mets were nowhere near being a buyer at the deadline. They were 11 games under 500. If anything, we had already started to talk about, okay, well, maybe the Mets are going to be shopping some pitching, Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, who's going to get moved, and then they completely turned it on and ended up being modest buyers. So this year, it is way too early to really figure out who's going to sell, who's going to buy, but we can start to take some educated guesses and just get our minds flowing, get our minds working on what could it look like? What do the Mets need? Because right now, you look at this team, it's an offense that hasn't been hitting, and yet I don't know if there is an external improvement that is on the table for the Mets. I think this team has to improve more internally. You need Mark Vientos to hit. You need Juan Soto to hit, certainly. Francisco Lindor's been struggling. You're hoping that you are able to get better production from Brandon Nimmo. Pete Alonso can continue what he's done largely for this season and put up big numbers. Francisco Alvarez, can he step it up? So there's a lot of room for internal growth. But going through position by position, there's really only a couple of spots the Mets could even target at the deadline because there's everyday players that are not going to be moved and are going to stay in their roles. So at the catcher position, whether it's Francisco Alvarez or Luis Torrens, the Mets are set. They're not going to be looking for a catcher. Even if one of those guys went down, they have Hayden Sanger as a defensive-minded backup. I still don't think they'd be going for a catcher. First base, not going to be looking for anyone. They got Pete Alonso. Shortstop, obviously Lindor. Nimmo and Soto aren't going anywhere. So you can cross off all those positions, and that leaves us with 4 potential spots to improve. Second base, third base, center field, and DH. Well, right now, Brett Baty is looking like the answer at third, and if it's not him, maybe Mark Vientos starts hitting. If it's not Vientos, maybe Ryan Mauricio comes up. It does feel like the Mets have a lot of internal options at third, and there's not going to be a ton available at third base unless the Cardinals are going to continue to shop Nolan Arenado. And I don't think the Mets are necessarily going to be in that market. You look at second base. That is an easier position to fill on the trade market at the deadline, but the Mets have Jeff McNeil. They have Luis Angel Acuna. They have Jet Williams in Double-A. They still have Brett Baty, who could play second, and Ronnie Mauricio. I look at the Mets infield, and I really don't think there's a world where they're going to significantly add at the deadline. You look at DH. Jesse Winker is going to come back. Right now, Jared Young is holding on to his spot. Mark Vientos could certainly just be a DH only by the time you get to the deadline if Brett Baty continues his ascension. So, yes, DH is always a place you could add, and maybe it is upgrading your lefty masher position because Starling Marte has not been too great this year. But again, I'm not necessarily seeing the greatest need, which is funny because if you looked at this team, you would say right now, well, they got to improve the hitting by the deadline because that's been the issue for them. Their pitching's been great. But when you go through the names that are on this roster and also even some of the names in the minor leagues, you feel like they might be able to plug a lot of these holes. The one exception to that is center field. Now, Tyrone Taylor has been awesome lately. Jose Siri is still on the injured list. He's going to give the Mets another option. Jeff McNeil, I think, has held his own in center field. I don't think he's a great defender, certainly out there. He's not going to be making that incredible, home run robbing play or the diving play that wows you. But at the same time, he's getting to a lot of balls. He's doing his thing, and he gives you a left-handed bat to plug into that spot. But I think that is where the Mets could potentially look at center field. Question is, which center fielders are available? And there's two that stand out on the market. Luis Robert is having a horrible year. And the guy that I think actually makes the most sense, someone I've talked about multiple times recently, because it's just been a topic we've been working on over at Just Baseball. We have an article that went up yesterday, as you guys are listening to this, talking about what a sell-off looks like for the Orioles. And Cedric Mullins is going to be moved. He's a rental. And the Orioles are not in a position to extend him a qualifying offer after the season. So they have to trade him. The question is, who's going to be in the market for Cedric Mullins? And the two teams that jump out are the Mets and the Phillies. Both teams could use another center fielder, particularly a left-handed center fielder. So this makes a lot of sense. You look at the numbers this year, overall, pretty solid. Not hitting for the highest of averages, 226, getting on base at a 320 clip, 446 slug, but he does have 10 home runs from the center field position, 9 doubles, 7 stolen bases. It's really been a tale of 2 months, though, for Cedric Mullins, because his first month, he was unbelievable. He's hitting 278, 412 on base, 555 slug, 927 OPS. His WRC plus was 171. WRC plus is weighted runs created plus, a stat that measures hitters on a league average of 100. So a 171 WRC plus means that Mullins was 71% better than your league average hitter. He hit 6 home runs in the month of April, or the combined months of March and April. Look at what he's done in May. Instead of being 71% better than your league average hitter, he's been 59% worse than your league average hitter. A 41 WRC plus, hitting 153, 180 on base, 341 slug, at 521 OPS. So for this to even be on the table, Mullins will have to put forth a much better effort over the next couple of months to make himself attractive at the deadline. But you have a rental center fielder who's left-handed, who has speed, who has some pop in his bat, who certainly has a better track record than a Tyrone Taylor. Not necessarily defensively. At this point, I think Tyrone Taylor is a better defender, but it would be an upgrade and a guy that could be a spark plug. You catch lightning in a bottle, and who knows what happens. And I think the cost wouldn't be that much to acquire him. The package that we have in the article at Just Baseball is Tylor Megill and Blade Tidwell. Now, giving up Tidwell on top of Megill might seem like a lot for a rental, and it might not be that pitching prospect. It could be a prospect a little bit lower down in the Mets system. But what the Orioles are going to need is pitching. And Tylor Megill actually makes a lot of sense for the Orioles. I think right now he would slot pretty close to the top of that rotation because they've just been that bad. Comes with 2 years of control after this season. I could even see, if they were desperate to get something for Mullins, a world where they say, you know what, we'll take Tylor Megill and a lottery ticket prospect just because they want to get something. And he's the guy that they could pencil into the rotation for the next couple of years. It would make some sense. So that's a trade that I don't necessarily know if I see the Mets pulling the trigger on, because I feel like David Stearns believes that they can sort of mix and match that center field position and make it all work. But it would be an attractive upgrade. And if the biggest thing you're giving up in the deal is a pitcher that is 8th on your depth chart right now for your rotation, or will be 8th in your depth chart once you get everybody healthy, I think it's definitely something you have to consider. And it certainly is feasible to think that these two sides could come together on a deal with the Mets deem that improving center field is the one place where they can really upgrade their lineup. And those rental trades, you never quite know. Sometimes they work, a lot of times they don't. But there's enough upside to dream on with Mullins where I would certainly consider pulling the trigger. Just would not give up a heavy prospect return to get him. You know, to me, it almost have to be a deal where the Orioles are really intrigued by the prospect of adding Tylor Megill, who is nice depth for the Mets, but this will likely be his last year he has an option. And I think once you look towards 2026, you have so many top pitching prospects that could be part of this picture that it might not be a bad idea to trade a little bit high on Megill if he can sustain this over his next couple starts. And if he ends up going down, you might have a guy whose major league numbers on the season looks something like a 3.5 ERA, yet he's been squeezed out of the rotation. And all of a sudden, I actually feel like that's a pretty attractive trade chip for the right team. And the Orioles seem like the right team for me on that note. That's why we wrote about it in the article. And that's also partially why we're talking about trade deadline on this show, because I think it is an interesting trade to discuss. But I also decided to look at the market and see, all right, doesn't feel like the Mets need any starting pitching, but if they can get an ace, would they pull the trigger? Who could be available? We're going to talk about that next. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. So you're looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious. Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel fuller, longer. Personally, I love the no-shells variety of Wonderful Pistachios. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days, and I love the smoky barbecue flavor. This is my favorite. I also am a big fan of the honey roasted. You can find so many different flavors to choose from, and it really is the snack that I choose to go to, whether it's just at my desk here, if I'm going on the road. Perfect grab-and-go snack for your needs. If you love cracking open every shell, for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are also there for a classic favorite. Get snacking and cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. When you look at the Mets pitching right now, you could certainly make an argument that they are not going to be in the market for a starting pitcher because they already have too many. Right now, the way the rotation has looked this season, hasn't been many holes. You got Kodai Senga, who's been brilliant. David Peterson, who's clearly established himself as a really good number 3 at worst. You have Clay Holmes, who has handled the transition to being a starting pitcher remarkably well. Griffin Canning has been really good for the most part, although his start yesterday certainly left something to be desired. And again, Tylor Megill has been very good. So you've had really great production. Your 2 highest paid additions from the offseason when it comes to your rotation are still on the injured list, but both on the mend. Frankie Montas, I believe he had, do you have his second rehab start? Oh, he's going to soon, regardless. We'll be talking about that stuff more on tomorrow's show. I'll break down Blackburn's rehab start, where we're at with Montas. We'll do some series preview stuff, maybe even some minor league stuff. There'll be a lot that we can cover then. But focusing on what the Mets look like at the deadline, they should have Montas back. They should have Manaea back. And so if you think about a rotation that, barring health, you're not going to remove Senga. You're not going to remove David Peterson for sure. And those 2 guys could be in the picture with Montas and Manaea. And Clay Holmes, for now, should be set in stone. But you never know if he might break down towards the end of the season just because he hasn't done a full year in a rotation. So that's a huge, huge ask. The Mets could be completely fine. I think the only way it makes sense to make a move is if you're getting somebody that is clearly the ace of the staff or the co-ace along with Senga. So who could be available? When it comes to struggling aces, that certainly could be on the move. Sandy Alcantara is obviously going to be discussed. We thought it was a complete slam dunk that he was going to get traded, but he's been brutal this season. 8.47 ERA through 11 starts, only 40 strikeouts and 51 innings pitched. His whip is 1.67. Whip is walked and hits over innings pitched, giving up more than a base runner and a half per innings. It's wild how bad Sandy has been. Can he right the ship over the next 6 weeks enough where it gets close to deadline time and teams are actually considering it? It's possible. There's every chance, though, that he's not moved, which could be a huge blow to the Marlins because I don't think they were expecting to have to pay him for the entire season. And they were counting on him giving them value. They clearly traded the wrong guy off of injury. They should have traded Alcantara during spring training and held on to Jesus Luzardo, but nothing you could do about it now. So we'll see if Sandy even gets moved. For now, you can't really consider it. A guy that struggled a little bit less that I think you can't consider is Zach Gallen. He's made 11 starts, a 5.25 ERA. He is a rental, so the Diamondbacks would be very incentivized to move him if they aren't in the mix, and they've had a little bit of a disappointing season thus far. So I could certainly see Gallen getting moved, and that's a guy I would definitely look at. I mean, you want to see the numbers be a little bit better by the time you get to the deadline. But he's certainly the type of guy that you can put towards the top of your rotation if you don't have to give up too much for a rental. I don't know if David Stearns is in the business of trading for rentals, though. That's the big question mark. A couple more that stand out in that regard. Framber Valdez would be the one that I would have absolutely no qualms about putting a top prospect on the table for, because this is a guy that has been a big game pitcher. He has been to the World Series. He's pitched in every single big game imaginable and has pitched great in the playoffs throughout his career. Left-handed starter that just knows how to get outs. 3.39 ERA so far this season. 11 starts, 69 innings pitched, which is super nice. To me, if there's one rental to target, it would be Framber, but you don't know if the Astros are even going to be moving pieces at the deadline. They are very much in the race right now in the AL West. So it's definitely a name to put in the back of your mind because of his status as a rental, where you could see the Astros making a move to try to extend their window beyond this season, getting prospects that can be a big part of their future. It won't come cheap, though. So that is an interesting name to discuss. I think it's the type of move you make if you feel like you are an arm away from winning it all. But I don't know if the Mets are going to feel like they have to go all in for a rental like that. The other two that jump out to me, Tylor Megill's been unbelievable this year. 1.80 ERA and 11 starts across 60 innings pitched, but he's only striking out 19% of the batters he's faced, and it's his first year of Tommy John. So some risk there for a guy that will be a free agent. But if you just look at run prevention, few guys have been better than Tylor Megill. And then you got Chris Bassitt, bringing him back. He's got a 3.38 ERA and 11 starts in 61 1/3 innings pitched. Career high striker rate of 23.7%, career low walk rate of 4.9%. It just seems like he continues to come into his own as a starting pitcher. I would not be mad at the trade at all. Do I think it moves the needle enough to give up some significant prospects for a rental? Maybe not. And then you have Kevin Gausman, his teammate, who has very similar numbers for the Blue Jays this year. He would come with an extra year of control at $22 million per. I think I maybe prefer Bassitt only in the sense that I don't know how much more you'd have to pay for that additional year of control of Gausman. Then again, maybe the Blue Jays are looking to get off the money. So we'll see. To me, though, what I would really want the Mets to do if they are going to trade for an ace is get a clear-cut guy. And there's two guys, I think, that jump out in that regard. And these are guys that come with control, which I think is what David Stearns would want if he's going to put a top prospect on the table to get an ace. So Pablo Lopez, we've been talking about him since the offseason. And the Twins are on a roll right now, so they very well could be buyers at the deadline and are standing pat. But if they have a bad month, like they did in April, if that ends up being their story in June and July and they actually do fall out of it, they would definitely consider moving Lopez because he makes $21.75 million this season and for the next 2 years, and they're a little bit more of a cash-strapped team. So getting rid of Lopez, getting some prospects, some fresh blood, I think that's certainly something they would consider. And this year, he's got a 2.31 ERA to start the season. Doesn't walk anybody, gets a good amount of strikeouts. This year, he's really keeping the ball in the yard. Only 3 home runs are allowed and 9 starts. I think that Pablo Lopez is a great fit for the New York Mets to not only be right up there with Kodai Senga as your ace this year, but to fit right into that window where over the next couple of years, you're saying, all right, if you just get yourself healthy to the playoffs with Kodai Senga, Pablo Lopez, and Sean Manaea, it's a pretty good 1-2-3 punch. And then you hope that some of your top prospects can factor into that mix as well once you get Christian Scott healthy. And then, of course, Brandon Sproat, Noel McLean, Jonah Pong, all these different guys at the upper levels in the Mets system. You hope that maybe some of them will factor into the mix in next year or 2027 at the latest. So that's the guy that I think makes a lot of sense. The other one that I've been clamoring for a long time is Freddy Peralta. He's cheap, though, and cheap in money means expensive in prospects. Some genius general manager back in 2020 for the Brewers signed Peralta dirt cheap, 5-year, $15.5 million pre-arb extension. Of course, I'm talking about David Stearns, who was the president of the Brewers at the time, or the GM. I don't remember exactly what his title was, but he was calling the shots, and that was a great deal. Deal included 2 club options. He's in the first of them now, $8 million. Next year, another $8 million club option. That means any team that's in the mix at the deadline can afford to trade for him. It's just a matter of if they give up the prospects to get a deal done. think it's going to cost a lot, but he's worth it. 2.55 ERA in 11 starts and 60 innings pitched this season. So those are the two that jump out to me the most when it comes to aces with control, Pablo Lopez and Freddy Peralta. And then if you're looking at the rental market, the guy that stands out to me the most is Framber Valdez. But if you can buy low on Zach Gallen, might not be the worst way to allocate some of your resources. There's one more starting pitcher, though, that I want to talk about. Guy that's pretty familiar to Mets fans. So we're going to throw out a little Jacob deGrom discussion in the next segment. And also I'll give you 3 closer types the Mets could target to bolster their bullpen and bridge the gap to Edwin Diaz. We'll get to all that in just a minute. If you're an everydayer that's always tuning into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime, take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, and get the lineup graphics sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, this last trade idea when it comes to starting pitchers is just for fun because it would never happen, as much as I hate to say it. It's an MLB The Show trade, and one that I actually made literally an MLB The Show because I just missed pitching with Jacob deGrom in the video game. So I was like, you know what? Easy to make trades here. Let's do it. Let's bring deGrom back, and it has been a lot of fun. I don't even know if Jacob deGrom would want to come back to the Mets. He has a full no-trade clause. So if he says no, I'm happy in Texas, he's staying in Texas. And I think that is still the most likely outcome because I don't know how many teams could even afford Jacob deGrom either. This guy makes a ton of money. He's at what's like $38 million a season. I did list here in my notes. It'd be $112 million to pick up Jacob deGrom for 3 years beyond this season. This year's making $40 million. Then it's 38. Then it's 37. Then there's a $20 million club option in 2028. But that club option turns into a player option if he hits 160 innings pitched. And it's not just a $20 million player option. It becomes a $37 million player option. So essentially, the contract pays it out as such where if Jacob deGrom is healthy, he is going to get paid for the next 3 years beyond this season. That's a lot of money to take on for a guy that's going to be in his age 38, 39, and age 40 seasons. It's tough. It's tough to see the Mets pulling the trigger on this one. It doesn't feel likely, but I still can't help painting that picture and what it would look like if Jacob deGrom, who now is healthy and he's got a 2.55 ERA. He's good again. It's been solid. Actually, it's a 2.42 ERA. Now, he did have the first start of his career his last time out where he did record a strikeout, which is wild. But the start before that, he went up against the Yankees and went 7 innings, allowed 2 earned runs, and struck out 9. So even without a strikeout in his most recent start, he's still striking out about a batter per inning, 62 and 63 in the third innings pitched. It was just an anomaly. He's got a whip under 1. Nothing would be cooler than Jacob deGrom running out to the mound at Citi Field with Simple Man blaring, Juan Soto in right field. It would be so insane. Costs too much money, probably won't move, and it's just not going to happen. But it was fun to talk about for half a second there. Why not? Let's go into the relievers, though. There's 3 closer types that I have figured out here that make a lot of sense to me that would be on the table potentially come the end of July. The first one's a guy that was always supposed to be moved, but the Cardinals had just been too good this year. So we need the Cardinals to fall off so that Ryan Helsley will be on the table. Helsley, absolute flamethrower, has pitched to a 3.32 ERA this year. Saved 49 games last season with a 2.04 ERA. This year, he saved 11. If you could close games out in the playoffs with Edwin Diaz and Ryan Helsley, watch out. So that's definitely a name to watch. And if the Cardinals are out of it, and even if they aren't out of it and they're still on the fringes of the playoff race, I could still see them moving him just because he's a rental. You don't necessarily want to extend a qualifying offer to a closer, even though you could. He's certainly the type of closer that would get one. But this would be an opportunity to recoup some value for Helsley before he leaves. And if you're the Mets, it just makes all the sense in the world to try to get the highest impact arm possible. I really think the Mets might be in a position where you look at your rotation, you say, you know what? We could add, but prices for starting pitching are astronomical. You have Kodai Senga. If Sean Manaea is throwing well by that point, and I'm sure it'd be limited starts, but if he looks good in his return, Frankie Montas is throwing the ball well. David Peterson is still doing his thing, and you at that point haven't seen drastic fall-offs from Clay Holmes and Griffin Canning, if at least one of them is throwing the ball well, I feel like you talk yourself into not needing anybody at the deadline when it comes to the rotation. And the same thing with the lineup. You can talk yourself into the guys in-house. And there's certainly a world where Mark Vientos starts hitting. Brett Beatty keeps hitting. So now third base is set. DH is set. McNeil keeps on swinging it well. Second base could be set. Center field, if Taylor keeps on playing well, I could see David Stern saying, you know what? We don't have to address this position and pay anything for a center fielder because you got a guy in Tyrone Taylor that's a great defender who has been swinging it pretty well. So there's a world the Mets might not need anything on that front, and then it all comes back to the bullpen, and maybe that implores them to be a little bit more aggressive at getting the type of arm that really makes a difference come October. Helsley is certainly one of them. If you want a couple guys with control, you got Pete Fairbanks from the Rays and Bryan Abreu from the Astros that both could be very attractive trade pieces. Depends on if those teams are in the race, although I think the Rays would probably dangle Fairbanks regardless. He's only got a year of control beyond this season, but from a Mets perspective, that does give you a nice option for 2026. It is actually a club option for them, a $7 million club option the Rays hold on Fairbanks, $1 million buyout. And this guy's been one of the most consistent relievers in baseball over the last couple of years. He's saved over 20 games in each of the last 2 seasons. This year, he's up to 10. He's got a 2.05 ERA in 22 innings pitched. Really electric arm, also an electric personality. I'd love to see him part of this Mets team. I think he would be one of those guys that you get at the deadline that just fits in seamlessly. So we'll see. Pete Fairbanks definitely makes some sense. And then Bryan Abreu, similar to what we were talking about with Framber Valdez in the last segment. The guy's pitching all the big games. If the Astros are out of it, they'd be wise to move him. He's got 1 year of arbitration after this season. So if you can trade him with a year and a half of control and a team can get 2 playoff runs with him, I think you might get a pretty penny in prospect capital for a reliever. This year, he's got a 1.90 ERA and 23 and 2/3 innings pitched, striking out nearly 30% of the batters that he's faced. Type of pitcher that he can go on stretches where he literally gives up nothing for 2 weeks, like barely any hits, doesn't walk any bunch, strikes out the world. You get him hot in October with Edwin Diaz, that's a really good recipe for success. So those are the names that stand out to me most in our absolutely way too early trade deadline preview, 2 months out. I'll do this again at the end of June. And then, of course, in July, we'll have plenty of discourse about trades. But I think it's fun to just do a little check-ins on where the market's at, which teams look like buyers, which teams look like sellers, who could be available, and the pieces that right now come to mind the most as star-level players the Mets could acquire. If there's a bat that makes sense, it's Cedric Mullins to me, although granted, if you want to poach another guy from the Orioles, Ryan O'Hearn's having an awesome season, would be a real upgrade for the Mets at DH. That's another guy that you could just kind of put in the back of your mind. When it comes to starting pitchers, Framber's on the table. I'd go all in on that rental. Otherwise, Freddy Peralta and Pablo Lopez are guys with control that might be worth trading some prospect capital for. And then when it comes to relievers, Ryan Helsley is a rental that's very intriguing, but you could also get an extra year of control if you target Pete Fairbanks or Bryan Abreu. That's what I have here. Those are the names. Let me know what you think. You think that any of those names look good? You think it's just crazy at all to talk about the deadline right now? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section on YouTube. If you're watching, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're listening, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on social media at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, check out Locked On MLB Game Night, the show that'll take you around all of the action in Major League Baseball with insight from all of our 30 local analysts. You can find Locked On MLB Game Night but Locked On MLB Game Night playing on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.